ahead and get started with Carrie's advice. And also feel free to type in your questions starting now. So take it away, Carrie.
All right, thank you, John. So first, I just wanted to kind of show you a few examples of what professional attire means and what that might look like. So a term that you might commonly hear is business professional. And so business professional is typically found in a little bit more traditional workspaces. So things, like maybe finance or a law firm, they tend to be much more formal. And so business professional is really at that level where typically a suit or equivalent would be required. So, you could wear dress pants, you could wear a skirt and a coordinating blazer, suit jacket, but really that's kind of a typical expectation. So in terms of color or patterns, it's typically fairly neutral. So, like in the examples here, you can see, there's like gray suit or, like striped tie is fine. A little bit of color, like a navy, a dark green, something like that's okay. But in general, you really want to stick to that, black, gray, white, navy, brown, not like a purple dress shirt, something like that that's going to stand out a lot. And then you just want to kind of continue that theme throughout the outfit. So obviously in terms of like shoes that you're wearing, those should be formal, closed-toed, even if they're kind of like the nice strappy, like open-toed shoes, that usually isn't considered for that like formal setting, not that they're inappropriate in other instances. So that's really what we kind of mean by business professional. So business casual is probably what most of you all would encounter in a work setting. So for instance, I would say John and I are both dressed in business casual. We're wearing dress shirts. I'm wearing a cardigan, so I'm not wearing like a suit jacket. It's a little bit more informal than that, but still professionally appropriate for the workplace. So as you can see some examples here, you can be a little bit more comfortable and casual. So things like, wearing khakis, polos, dress shirts, but you have a lot more leeway in terms of style and colors. So, still, I wouldn't necessarily advocate wearing like lime green or, hot pink on a daily basis, but, definitely a little bit more flexibility. If you are somebody that wears skirts or dresses, you still want to kind of stick to that knee length or a little bit longer. So then even if you're seated, at your desk, it's still going to be an appropriate length, not going to be a mini skirt situation or anything. So hopefully that gives you a few reference points as we're talking. And then that kind of casual wear that isn't necessarily appropriate for a general, professional workplace would be things like jeans or shorts or t-shirts, sneakers. That definitely falls much more on the casual side versus what's considered business casual. So my first tip for you all is to really think about your outfit as a whole. Because a lot of times, maybe you have an interview coming up, you're thinking ahead about what outfit you're going to wear, what's going to be appropriate professionally for that situation. But sometimes folks don't always consider their whole look. So for instance, they have a nice dress shirt, they have some dress pants on, but what about your shoes? Are they clean? Are they professional looking? Or, I know I'm somebody that I generally have a giant purse. So like if I'm going to an interview, I wouldn't take a giant hot pink purse with me. I might wear that in my normal everyday life, but if I'm going to an interview, I'm going to choose something that's a little bit more traditional, much smaller, because you really only want to take what's absolutely necessary, kind of avoid having your like 40-pound backpack with you. So really thinking about how does your outfit as a whole work together. And you also want to make sure to always dress appropriately for the situation. So I talked a little bit about that kind of business professional versus business casual, but every workplace is different. So like I mentioned, you might be, working at a banking setting where they are really expecting that business professional, but if you're interviewing or working at a job as a camp counselor, nobody's going to be wearing a suit, right? Like if you're working outdoors, t-shirts, shorts, that's absolutely acceptable. So if you're interviewing for a job, you always want to kind of wear a step up from what you would be working in every day. So, I wouldn't necessarily wear a suit to an interview as a camp counselor, but I also wouldn't necessarily wear an old t-shirt and shorts either. Like that might be a situation where a polo and khakis, you're dressing up a little bit, taking it seriously, but it's not so far beyond what you would be expected to wear on a normal basis. So that's kind of one way to think about it, is that one step up. And, when you're researching employers, that can also give you a little bit of a sense. So sometimes, they might share things on social media or on their website where you can kind of get a sense of like, what do the employees tend to wear on a daily basis. If it's a situation where it's a startup, sometimes they're a little bit less formal too. So doing a little bit of research can kind of help you figure out what might be the right level to dress for. And in general, I would always just err on the side of being conservative. So, at the end of the day, it's up to you how you want to express yourself. And there's definitely leeway with that. But if you're not sure and you're like, well, maybe I want to wear this, skirt or this one, like, I'm not sure if this one would be right. Like maybe it's a little bit short, like, then I would just go with the other one. Because once you get the job, you start working there, you can often get a much better sense of what's the actual expectation like for working there every day. That's something that you could ask in an interview. Some places have more formal dress codes and others don't. But in general, it's better to be a little bit overdressed than underdressed. You also want to keep your outfit from distracting from your experience and qualifications. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So a few years ago, when I was on an interview panel, we had someone come in and she was dressed very professionally. She was in a suit. She had a lot of great information to share in her interview. And she was wearing some gold bracelets. And so they were professional, it wasn't anything overly gaudy or flashy, but she was somebody that talked with her hands. And I do this too. And so every time that she moved her hands, her bracelets would kind of jangle, make noise. And it was really distracting because it was just constantly happening over a 45-minute interview. And so, it wasn't a reason why we didn't hire her. We had somebody that just had more experience. They were a better fit for our office, but that was kind of the thing that everyone remembered was, oh, she was the person who kept, hearing all that kind of extra noise. So think about that, as you're putting your outfit together. What's it going to be like when you're sitting, but also if you're moving around? If you're taking a tour of the office, you have to walk around. Can you walk in the shoes that you're choosing? Things like that. And then just make sure that you're projecting confidence because, at the end of the day, you kind of need to fit into some of those basic standards and expectations, but also you want to wear stuff that feels true to you. If you're somebody where you don't ever want to wear heels, you don't feel comfortable wearing a dress or a skirt in everyday life, don't choose an interview for the day that you're going to try that style out. Like that's not something that you have to do. So, keep in mind what is going to be a good fit for you that you feel confident in. So if like this shirt, I always feel really great in, I know it fits me well, then choose that for what you want to wear. Because, you know, sometimes for folks with things like tattoos or piercings or, you know, maybe some unnatural hair colors, you know, there are some places where that might be against dress code, where you would have to cover up your tattoos or take out a piercing. And other ones aren't. So if that's something really important to you, where you want to work somewhere where, you know, you don't have to abide by those things, then seek out the places that do that, you know, if that's what helps you feel confident. And then finally, I also just wanted to mention the Jcpenney Suit Up event. So that's happening this weekend. It's online, so you don't have to go into a store. But if you text the number on the screen there, you can get an extra coupon. And so it's good for anything that Penny's classifies as career or professional wear. So in the past, that's a pretty broad distinction. So they certainly have things like suits if you're looking for something like that. But, you know, also like dress shoes, purses, jewelry, ties, belts, they tend to be pretty expansive with what counts for that. So if you are in a scenario where you're maybe looking for some new items, that's a good idea just to check out and see if there's anything that you would be interested in.
All right. Well, thank you, Carrie, for that advice. That's all wonderful advice. Great information to have. We're already beginning to get some questions to roll in. So I would say to our attendees, please continue to submit your questions, and we will do that. So this first question is, they say, so is there such a thing as overdressing when wearing professional attire? Which is a great question. And, you know, my response would be yes and no, but kind of to Carrie's point, you want to err on the side of caution. You know, she mentioned the camp counselor position, or that example of you wouldn't necessarily want to wear, you know, a full three-piece suit or something like that, because you want to think about that environment, think about how those other individuals who work there might be dressing, and then kind of go one step above. I know from a personal example, I remember my high school counselor was mentioning that they had applied to a position as like a farmhand at a farm, and they showed up wearing a full suit and wearing some kind of professional attire. And another candidate showed up wearing clothes that you would expect a farmhand to be wearing. And so they, of course, the school counselor, of course, did not get that job. But that's another example of kind of dressing for the occasion and dressing for the position. So again, really doing that research is going to be helpful with that. So in general, you know, err on the side of caution, and you want to, you know, when in doubt, go kind of one step up. But it's, you know, there is the possibility for overdressing, but I would be much more comfortable going in that direction rather than the other direction, if that makes sense. So yeah, that is a great question. We've also got another question here. So would a black tote bag so that you could take a pad and paper or pen be appropriate at an interview, or should you carry those separately? So Carrie, I don't know if you want to kind of give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that definitely would be professional. So in general, what I would usually advise is to kind of take as small of a purse or bag as you can to fit what you need. So yeah, absolutely, it can be a good idea to take, you know, like a notebook or a padfolio if you have some notes that you want to look at while you're waiting for the interview to start, or some questions that you wrote down ahead of time that you want to make sure and ask the folks in your interview. So yeah, you know, just kind of like a neutral tote bag, that's absolutely fine. But you could also, like, if that's all you're carrying in, you know, you have your like ID in your pocket and a pen that you can fit in that like padfolio, you could also just kind of carry that in too. So partially it's just a personal preference of what works for your style.
Yeah, and that's great advice and a great question. I would also think about, you know, be aware of what's in your hands if you're walking in with like coffee or water. If you know, don't have somewhere to set that, or if you don't have a purse or a carry-all or something to store that in, you know, in in-person interviews, you'll probably be expected to shake their hands. So just kind of be aware of what you're bringing in and think about, do you really need this in that setting or at that moment? And so try to kind of, I guess, pack light, but pack the essential items that you do need to bring. So yeah. So looks like we've addressed most of the questions on here now. I would, again, recommend if you do have questions that haven't been addressed quite yet, please put those in the chat. I wanted to ask you, Carrie, what you think about some different resources for conducting research about what you may want to wear to an interview. I know you touched on a few of them, but are there any other good resources that you would suggest our students kind of take a look at to get an idea of what constitutes professional wear for specific settings?
Definitely. So, I think there's a variety of things that you can look at to kind of help you search. So like I mentioned, sometimes on their website or their social media, they may have like photos of them. So, sometimes it's like, oh, they're using stock images and they're like advertisements. But if they're actually like, oh, meet our employee, or, here's our new person or our new director who's been promoted, like that's very helpful if you can tell it's actually a real employee. Like, what are they wearing? Does it look like they're all kind of wearing business casual? Are they all in, like suits, very formal? So that's something that can give you a good idea. And then, also checking out some other sites. So things like Glassdoor can be a good resource. So there's that interview tab, or you can search to see what information people have shared about their interview experiences with the company. So, sometimes people will say like, oh, this is a question they asked me that kind of stumped me, or, it felt like a really, pretty easy interview. The interviewers were, really interested, very helpful, very kind, or, whatever their experience was. So sometimes that can also give you a little bit of a sense there. And then beyond that, there's some kind of other more specific things that I would advocate doing as well. So if you know someone, so, maybe if you have a contact who works at that company, or another student who interned there, that's a really great resource to ask them what kind of the standard dress code is like at that organization. That's something that you could do to reach out, especially if it's a scenario where it's really not clear, kind of a unique setting. That's definitely something that you could do, is just kind of get that insider response. And there's a lot of other specific places for particular industries. So for instance, I mentioned law firms at the beginning as one work setting that tends to be a little bit more formal. And so there are a lot of blogs out there because, even like 10, 20 years ago, that sometimes it's really hard for folks to fit into these very rigid dress codes where it's like, okay, I'm looking for like this specific type of suit, or like, I need to find shoes that are like within this heel height. Like, do you all have suggestions? And so I know there's like corporate or like blogs like that are kind of long-standing that have advice for like what's considered appropriate for settings. So depending on what your industry is, there's probably information out there. So honestly, if you just do a little bit of Googling, or like, what do people wear at startups? Like that can give you some good information, and then you can kind of aggregate that. So if it's like everybody's kind of saying the same thing, that might be a good standard to follow. Or if it seems much more variable, then, I would, as John said, go for a little bit overdressed than underdressed if you're not quite sure which side of the spectrum to fall on. So those are all, things that you can do to research. And, it's not wrong to ask. So if it's something where it's like really unclear, or, maybe it's a situation where it's like, you are a dance major, and so you're applying for dance. And so you're not clear of like, is this interview something where you need to be in outfit you would wear for dancing, like if you need to be like physically active and audition, or is this more of like a traditional interview for like a staff position where you want to be dressed up. So if it's a scenario like that where you're just really not clear, you can just ask the interviewer, like what kind of standard of dress should I be wearing, or do I need to bring like an outfit to audition in? Like that could be perfectly reasonable to do.
Yeah, great advice. And the aspect where you're talking about kind of if you know someone who's interned there or interned in a similar situation, or if you have connections who are have worked in that industry, certainly reaching out to them can be helpful. I know in previous Ask Us about webinars, we kind of talked about the idea of informational interviewing. And if that's something that you engage in and you want to connect with someone in that field to learn about their experience, that might be a question that you would want to ask them to say, what are some standard professional practices in terms of attire at this company or at this within this field. So another option that you can use as well. Not seeing any more questions coming in the chat. I'll just say there's one last opportunity for you guys to get those in there. And in the meantime, I would recommend trying it out first through whatever outfit you're deciding to wear. So say you have an interview in a few days, go ahead and you have something in the closet. I would say go ahead, put it on, make sure it still fits. I know from personal experience, there have been times where I just don't use my professional wear very often, and then I'll say, oh, wow, I've gained or lost weight in the amount of time since I last wore this shirt. So make sure it fits and make sure it's somewhat comfortable. I mean, you don't necessarily want it to be sweatpants comfortable, but make sure that you can still kind of focus on what you need to be focused on while you're in the moment and while you are, if it's interviewing, making sure that it's not going to impede your ability to do that. If it's exceptionally uncomfortable shoes, or if it's, an overly tight pants or shirt or something like that, just make sure that you are somewhat comfortable and it's not going to kind of interfere with that experience. So and the same way with trying it out, like the bracelets example or the jangling, that's a perfect example that I think, in theory or in your mind that sounds great, that yeah, you want to wear those nice bracelets, but in practice, maybe there are some things that you're missing. So I would just advocate for a couple days ahead of time, or the day before or something like that. Just make sure everything is kind of good to go.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going on with that, situational preparedness, I would also think about the time of year, because I know when I've had job interviews in the past, or been on hiring committees, it's definitely different. Like if you're coming in the middle of winter, yes, you don't want to carry more than you need of having like, your giant puffy coat, but also you do want to be prepared for if it is cold, or if they're saying like, especially for a really large company where they're like, oh, maybe, we need to go to this other building, or, give you a quick tour. So not kind of like a small office, but, really large corporation that wouldn't necessarily be bizarre to have to walk around a little bit. So, be prepared for that scenario, or like shoes that you're choosing. I know for me personally, like I tend to run a little bit warmer. So like I usually don't wear long sleeves ever, like in terms of shirts. I just have very long arms, so I can't find ones that fit easily. I get hot. But also sometimes office buildings just run super cold. And so, you don't want to be stuck there in your like short sleeve shirt being cold for an hour in an interview. Like it's a lot better, I think, if you can kind of layer. So, if you have like a cardigan or a sweater or jacket, something like that. So then if it's really warm, you can take it off, wear like a short sleeve shirt, that's fine. If you get cold, you can put it on. So, I would also advocate for that sometimes, especially if that's, something that you know about yourself. And same thing kind of like with summer, you still want to dress formally. So, you still want to wear a dress pants or dress skirt or something like that, but see if you can choose lighter weight fabrics. Like that nice wool suit is probably not what you want to wear in July. Because even if it's just that quick walk from like a parking garage into the building, you don't want to get all sweaty and gross and hot. So, kind of think about the weather, the situational things too.
Yeah, those are great points. Definitely. And one other thing that sometimes comes up, or people might not be always sure of the right way to go, but some people have tattoos, visible tattoos, or body piercings, or things like that. Carrie, what would you recommend for students who might not be sure kind of how to address that when dressing professionally or dressing in certain situations?
Yeah, so I would say for kind of a typical like business environment, I think it's a good idea to go a little bit more conservative if you can. So, if you have like a lip piercing or, a lot of ear piercings or something, you know, I would maybe take out some of those ones, kind of stick to a little bit more typical, like, if you have kind of like double piercings here, that's, fairly standard versus like if you have all the way up or something. So same thing kind of with tattoos. I would say in general, a little bit more conservative or kind of cover them up because that often is something where you can get a better sense. So then once you're at that interview, seeing, who are the people that are working there? What do they look like? What are they wearing as you're walking through the office to go do your interview? Or, they may have like a employee handbook online that talks about their dress interview. So then you can get a sense of like, yeah, plenty of people here have, blue hair or pink hair. Like that doesn't seem to be out of the norm. That clearly is something, they're okay with versus everyone's very formal, very covered up. So I would generally tend a little bit more conservative, especially if you're not sure. But, that being said, there are certainly companies that are going to be more flexible or, I think ones that are in more of those like creative areas. So, if it's like a video game company, they may be a little bit more flexible with that sort of, dress code than something like a bank that's probably going to be more traditional. So, that's kind of what I would consider too. And then I think also just the content, so like if you have like a tattoo of a butterfly on your arm, that's probably not a huge deal if somebody sees that when you move your arm versus, if it's maybe a little bit more controversial subject matter, or something where like people might have a little bit more reactions to it, that also might be something that you would think about covering up a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely good advice, and thinking about the content, but then thinking about the culture of the organization that you're applying to, or that you'll be interacting with. If it is more, as you mentioned, like arts based or more creative, then yeah, there may be a little bit more leeway, or that might not be as big of a deal. More formal business settings, things like, as you mentioned, banks or things like that, then yeah, maybe you want to really err on the side of caution and make sure that you're doing what you think is best. So well, great, such great information. I'm still not seeing any more questions coming in. So Carrie, I want to ask you if you have any final thoughts or anything else you would like to suggest before we kind of call it a day and end the webinar.
Sure. So, I mean, everything I think you talked about too, I would say just being proactive, is good. So making sure that you do have, some kind of professional wear ready. So if you have an interview come up unexpectedly, you're not going to be in a flutter to say, like some of us that have maybe gained a little bit of weight over quarantine to like, oh, now I have to try to shop online and find something that fits or, go to the store. So I would always kind of make sure you have some outfit, in the background that's ready to go. Or if that's something where you're going to be graduating this May, you're going to have interviews coming up, kind of get ahead of that. So you don't have to worry about it at the last minute. And then, like we said, There's a lot of situational context, so you kind of want to follow some of those standard norms, but at the end of the day, you also want to consider what feels good to you. What's gonna make you be confident, because if you're somebody where you're like, I don't want to go to work in a full suit every day, that seems like a nightmare. Like, I have tattoos, I don't want to have to wear full sleeves every day for the rest of my working career, then try to seek out those organizations that are more casual. They certainly exist. I mean, even for lawyers, there are nonprofits where they wear pretty, business casual clothes every day. It's not necessarily like a high powered law firm where they're required to wear suits. They may have to do that for court, but not necessarily if they're just working the office doing research. So, there are organizations out there that I think you can find that right fit for you. And especially the more you talk to folks, like we mentioned, if you have contacts, doing some networking, informational interviews, that can give you a better sense of, what are you looking for, and how can you find that somewhere.
Yes, great points all around. So with that, I want to thank everyone for engaging in this chat and this webinar today. As I mentioned at the beginning of our session, you'll be receiving an email with a recording, links to any resources shared, and information about how to connect with the CPDC. And yeah, I want to thank you all for engaging, for asking great questions. And don't forget to participate in the virtual online Jcpenney Suit Up event this weekend from March 19th to the 21st. And then our next web event will be Ask Us About Job and Internship Applications on March 31st at noon Central Time. So you can find out more about that session and registration details in the events section of your Handshake profile account. So with that, I want to thank you all again and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much, John.
Thanks.